Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS, a one-stop destination for all the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to another session of Economy this week, wherein we are going to take up important economy-related articles from different newspapers from 20th to 26th November 2026 and analyze these articles in detail so that you'll be able to answer the questions in prelims as well as mains examination. If you're liking this initiative, do not forget to hit the like button. If you are yet to join our YouTube channel, kindly do it right now. Before I start with the first article, a very important announcement. All our courses right now are available at a discounted price of 25%. Those who are aiming to ace the civil services examination 2026 and 2027, this is a golden opportunity for you. Once you visit the website, the prices could be different. But once you use the code IAS English, the prices will be cut by one fourth or 25%. This is a limited time period offer. You make the best use of it. Those who are interested, check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description. Let's start the discussion now. The first very important article. The center has announced that it will be releasing a new GDP series on February 27, 2026. What are the important points? Let's understand. Gross domestic product, or in short, GDP, measures what is the market price of all the final goods and services which are produced in the Indian territory. Now, this particular measurement under the government of India is done and published by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. But specifically under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, which is the responsible party or the authority. MoSPI is divided into two parts. One is NSO, National Statistical Office, and the second one is Program Implementation. In this context, it is the NSO which is important. NSO has two more parts again. One is NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization, and the second one is CSO, Central Statistical Office. Now focus on CSO because it is the CSO which is responsible for measuring and publishing the gross domestic product. GDP is published for every quarter. GDP is published for every financial year. And the right way is important in terms of measuring the GDP. When I say right way, what kind of industries do we consider? How do we collect the data from the industries, etc.? There are three methods to calculate GDP. One is the production or value addition method, and the second one is the income method, and the third one is the expenditure method. Third one is the expenditure method. The MoSPI right now has released documents explaining how they would be collecting data. And it has stated that in the coming days, a second paper will be released where how the methodology will be used to collect the data and calculate GDP under expenditure method. So I'll repeat the point again. Right now, how the methodology will be used for production as well as income methodology to calculate GDP, the discussion paper has been released. And the second paper, which will detail how GDP would be calculated using the expenditure method in the new methodology or in the new system, will be released in the some days. In addition to this, please remember there is also a committee or advisory body which has been set up by the government of India, which is advising in the context of having a change in the base year, having a change in the composition of the industries, change in the methodology of data collection. And that advisory body is headed by B.N. Goldar. Remember, the name can be asked in the prelims examination. B.N. Goldar. Now, what are the changes that will be introduced? First important change that will be guaranteed is change in the base year. Change in the base year. Right now, the base year that we are using in the context of GDP calculation is 2011 and 2012. The government of India has proposed to change the base year to 2022 and 2023. Have a look at the data here. The base year will be changed to financial year 23, that is 22 and 2023. Now, with this announcement, Indian government will be changing the base year for a total eighth time since independence. Since independence, this will be the eighth time the base year would be changed. What are the other instances where the base year has been changed? Have a look at this. 48 and 49 to 60 and 61. This announcement was done back in 1967. That was the first change in the base year. Second change in the base year was done in 78. Third change in the base year was done in 88. Fourth change in the base year was done in 1999. Fifth change in the base year in 2006. Sixth change in 2010. And seventh change that was announced by the government of India back in the 2015 took up the base year of 2011 and 12. So now these are the important changes. Methodology in terms of how data will be collected, how industries would be covered, how, right, let's say data would be used to calculate GDP. There will be certain changes. You do not have to be worried right now. Once the new methodology is announced, I will have a detailed discussion associated with that. Second very important point that you need to remember is the change in the base year. Right now, the base year is 2011 and 12. The new base year will be 22 and 23 or financial year 23. Third very important point, the advisory committee. The name of the advisory committee is B.N. Goldar Committee, and this committee will give recommendation regarding the change in the base year and the methodology. And if you're wondering, is there a change or is there a requirement to change the methodology? Of course, yes. From one time period to another time period, the composition of economy will change. Some industries will become too important in terms of contribution to GDP. Some industries will perish. These will become outdated industries. They will have to be removed from the methodology where the data is actually estimated, collected, etc. So there will be changes in the economy. We need to incorporate the changes. Hence, there is a change in the base year. There is a change in the methodology collected, etc. In addition to this, you also need to measure GDP in order to find out what is the effectiveness of the government of India's policies. Are the government of India's policies contributing or hindering the industrialization, production, productivity of the Indian economy? And more importantly, how is Indian economy performing compared to the other competitors? Is Indian economy in terms of GDP increasing, and are we moving towards more and more China, or the gap is widening, narrowing? How are we performing compared to USA, etc.? Of course, yes, this is not the only measure of comparison between the countries or amongst the countries. But this is one of the very important growth indicators. It is one of the most important growth indicators that is used to compare the countries like this. So these are certain very important points associated with this. Let's solve an MCQ. Those who want to solve it on your own, pause the video, solve it, then listen to the discussion. And if you simply say, sir, I don't want to solve it, you solve it, you are the teacher, let me solve it, you don't have to pause, listen to the discussion. Consider the following statements. GDP base year has been revised 7 times so far. So far in the sense, this base year has been announced, change has been announced, not yet implemented. So before this, how many changes have been done? How many times the base year has been changed? 7 times the change has been done. Yes. GDP is published by CSO. Yes, that is also true. Currently, the base year for the GDP calculation is 2012. And when you come across the number 2012, it refers to the calendar year. Are we using the calendar year? No, we are using 2011 and 2012 financial year. Third one is incorrect. 2 of the statements are true. Right option for the question is option B here. Let me go forward. Next article. The Ministry of Civil Aviation proposes 30,000 crore push to scale up UDAN scheme. Now, what are the important points? What is the right takeaway that you should understand from this particular article? Let's understand. Point number 1. The government of India in the last decade, that is 10 years ago, announced National Civil Aviation Policy, NCAP. Now, under the National Civil Aviation Policy, the government of India identified the fact that Very small percentage of India's population actually uses civil aviation. Very small percentage of the population. And within that also, the problem was most of the users of civil aviation, that is customers, passengers who are flying, these are concentrated in large cities. These are present mainly in the large cities, that is according to the classification of cities in India, tier 1 cities. But there are tier 2 and tier 3 cities. There are tier 2 and tier 3 cities where there is potential, there is a market, but lot of these particular airports are either underserved or unserved. Either these are underserved or unserved. Meaning what? Either number of planes which are going to these airports, these are not sufficient. So the market potential is there, we are not able to leverage it. Or else, in these particular cities, there is no civil aviation services whatsoever. So government of India looked at this particular problem, and to address this, back in the year 2016, back in the year 2016, announced UDAN scheme. UDAN stands for Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagarik. Or else another name for this is also a regional connectivity scheme. Regional connectivity scheme. Now, it has been almost 10 years since the implementation. Again, I'm saying almost because we have not yet completed 10 years, by the way. It's been almost 10 years since the implementation of the UDAN initiative. And what has been the performance of the UDAN initiative? Has it improved this particular market of civil aviation in tier 2 as well as tier 3 cities? Of course, yes, there is absolutely no doubt regarding that. The number of passengers who are flying into these smaller cities, and out of these smaller cities, the number of passengers have increased. The number of plane services have increased. But having said so, please understand, there has been certain concern associated with this initiative. Just to give you certain data, so far, according to the Government of India's data point, or let's say the published data, 649 airports or the routes have been launched under UDAN initiative, and 92 airports which were earlier unserved or underserved have been covered under UDAN initiative. But having said so, I said there is an issue with UDAN initiative. What is the issue? This initiative was launched back in the year 2016. The government of India started providing certain financial assistance under this in the name of viability gap funding, VGF, viability gap funding. Under this particular viability gap funding, certain financial assistance would be provided to these particular air carriers, because under UDAN initiative, fixed wing carriers will be covered as well as helicopters would be covered. In simple terms, aeroplanes and helicopter services would be covered. Government would provide certain financial assistance, but with the condition that some of the seats which would be provided to the flyers or passengers under the UDAN initiative will be given at a very, very low cost, 50% of the ticket price. That is essentially would be reduced. For example, in air carriers, if you're flying for 1 hour, the ticket price would not be more than 2,500 rupees for half of the seats which are sold. So these kind of initiatives were implemented come pandemic. Then there was a pandemic. During pandemic, the civil aviation market was badly hurt, and a lot of these regional carriers were not able to continue the cost of operations, and a lot of them either have discontinued providing UDAN routes or have shut down altogether. And this actually hampered the implementation of UDAN scheme. But now the Ministry of Civil Aviation says they are ready to allocate 30,000 crore rupees. I repeat, 30,000 crore rupees to launch the next round of UDAN initiative, or to scale up UDAN initiative. Out of this particular 30,000 crore rupees, the government of India says 18,000 crore rupees. 18,000 crore rupees will be for new airport development, and remaining 12,000 crore rupees will be viability gap funding, VGF, viability gap funding. And with this UDAN initiative now, or with this allocation of 30,000 crore rupees, the government of India simply says for the next 10 years, that is after 2027, when UDAN, first round of UDAN will be completing 10 years. So after 2027, for the next 10 years, under the UDAN initiative, there will be 120 destinations which will be covered under this. And in the next 10 years, we will be carrying 4 crore, just make a correction, 4 crore passengers under the routes identified under UDAN. So these are certain important points associated with the, right, let's say the new round of UDAN scheme allocations announced by the government of India. Now, those who are wondering, sir, how many points you have written, how do I take it down? Very difficult for me to write down because you are writing one over the other, etc. Please do not worry. After the session has been uploaded, after this video is uploaded on the YouTube, there will be a link provided in the description. Indian Economy Repository link. Click on the link. You'll be taken to a Google page. In that particular Google sheet, the PPTs link as well as the notes link, all of them, of all the ETWs that I'm taking, will be uploaded. Click on the link, download, but more importantly, use the notes for revision purposes. Now, before I go forward to the next article, let's solve an MCQ. Consider the following statements regarding UDAN scheme. It was announced as a part of National Civil Aviation Policy. Yes. The focus under the scheme is to increase the passenger tariff in major airports in India. This is not the objective. Improve connectivity in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. The scheme focuses on air travel done by fixed wing planes as well as helicopters. Yes, you cover aeroplanes, these are called as fixed wing planes, as well as helicopters. Two of the statements are true. Right option will be option B. Let's go forward. Next article, banks have fully implemented SWIFT messaging norm. Now, what are the important points here? SWIFT, first and foremost, stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. I repeat, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. This for the first time was introduced back in the year 1973. It was founded in 1973 and has become operational since 1977. That is, it went live in 1977. What is the use of this? Let's imagine I am exporting something to another country. Now the importer who is sitting in the other country, let's say hypothetically USA, that person has to send dollars to me. How can they send dollars? Because the bank, their bank is in USA, my account is in bank which is in India. So there has to be certain communication that is done between both of these particular banks. And that is exactly what the SWIFT will provide. It is not a tool to transfer money. Please remember, it's not a tool to transfer money. Essentially, SWIFT platform will allow the banks to communicate with each other. They will allow the banks to talk to each other. Talk in the sense messages can be transmitted from one bank to another bank. And because these are very sensitive data points or very sensitive information, this is basically a platform which is allowed only for these kind of financial institutions. And if any of the banks are not allowed to access these kind of, right, let's say platform, for example, after Russia attacked Ukraine, the G7 group of countries came together, the Western countries came together, imposed the sanctions on the banks in Russia, did not allow the Russian banks to get access to the SWIFT ecosystem or SWIFT platform. That's a reason the transactions, that is basically the amount that I was supposed to pay to the Russian exporter, there was a disruption and an alternative mechanism has been announced and implemented by Reserve Bank of India. That is basically the concept of Ostro and Nostro mechanism. Anyways, come back to this. The SWIFT, right, platform allows the financial institution, that is the banks, to communicate with each other, and after the message is sent, received, confirmation is done, only after that the funds would be transferred. That is the importance of SWIFT mechanism. Now, a new set of standards were announced by SWIFT. New set of standards. This is referred to as SWIFT, please remember the name, can be asked in the UPSC preliminary examination. ISO 20022 standards. I repeat, SWIFT ISO 20022 standards. And what is the importance of this particular set of standards? Once the banks will adopt these particular standards, more granular, more relevant, more detailed information in an efficient way can be communicated between the banks now. Simple. Don't do a PhD on all of this. More granular data, more detailed information now can be communicated amongst these particular banks over the SWIFT platform. Right? That is basically the importance of SWIFT ISO standards. And the organization had basically stated that come November 23rd, right? That is the last date for these particular banks to adopt was November 22nd. Just make a correction. November 22nd. November 22nd, 2025 would be the last date for the banks to adopt and implement these particular standards. And failing which, the organization had announced that there would be penalties, there would be certain issues or constraints regarding using the SWIFT telecommunication system. The banks in India, all the banks which are part of the SWIFT system, all the banks have successfully implemented this. That is the update which has been provided in the article. And please remember a couple of more points associated with the SWIFT. Globally, there are more than 11,000 banks which are there under the SWIFT system. That is, which are using the SWIFT system for transfer of funds. And the banks, individually, all of these banks will have a SWIFT code or else also referred to as BIC, Bank Identifier Code. The bank identifier code or SWIFT code generally either is a 8-digit code or a 11-digit code. So individual identification of the banks is possible using the code. These are certain points associated with the article. Let's solve an MCQ associated with this. Consider the following statements regarding SWIFT. Under this, each of the banks are given a unique code. Yes. Using this platform, the funds are transferred. Incorrect. It was first used in 1971 after the collapse of gold standard. Yes, 1971 is associated with collapse of gold standard when USA stated that the USA announcement was that they were not going to use the gold standard, that is the exchange rate, anymore. Yes, 1971 is associated with that. But is the 1971 associated with the launch of the SWIFT? SWIFT, like I said, for the first time was introduced in 1973, founded in 1973, and it went live in 1977. Third statement is incorrect. Only one of the statement is true. Right option will be option A here. Let me go forward. Next article. Reform panel moots easing China investment curbs. In the last session, if you have not yet seen that, please do watch it. I covered the articles from 13th November to 19th November. And one of the articles that I discussed in detail was a committee, Rajiv Gauba Panel. Rajiv Gauba Panel recommending withdrawal, removal, or let's say stoppage of some of the QCOs, quality control orders. Around 200 QCOs have been identified by the panel, wherein the panel simply says these are hurting manufacturing, these are hurting MSMEs. Hence, either you will have to withdraw. They have listed how many have to be withdrawn. Some of them have to be paused, etc. Now, the same committee, Rajiv Gauba Panel, has given one more recommendation. One more recommendation. And in fact, in the same video, I also discussed one more article or one more concept. The government of China negotiating with India, or the people who are negotiating with, let's say, the government of India's representatives, they have highlighted this particular issue of Press Note 3. Remember this. Press Note 3. That is basically one of the policy announcements of government of India. Now, what is the connection of all of this to this article? Let's start. The Rajiv Gauba panel has recommended that the government of India has to review the Press Note 3. And what is the Press Note 3? According to the Press Note 3, which was announced back in the year 2020, the government of India imposed certain restrictions on the foreign investment that is coming into India through any country that shares land border with India. Simple. Any investment that is coming from a country which shares a land border with India land border with India. Now this investment has to be done in India only through approval route. Only through approval route. That is, before investing, they will have to take the permission and then they are allowed to invest. This has been flagged by the Chinese authorities as restrictive, which hurts Chinese investors or Chinese investments, right, in India. What is the recommendation that has been provided by this particular panel? It has recommended one, the government of India should withdraw the press note 3 altogether. Withdraw the press note 3 altogether. The options are given here. I'll discuss this. Please have a look at it. The press note 3 should be withdrawn altogether. Allow FDIs even from China to be done in India. But if you're worried that these investments might be a problem for national security, these investments might be a problem for the government in order to basically ensure that there is no takeover of Indian companies' access to sensitive financial information of Indian citizens for the foreign companies, especially from China, etc. If that is a concern, let's have certain system in the place. What is the system? The system is allow investment proposals where beneficial ownership is not more than 10%. In simple terms, beneficial ownership, it is also referred to as significant beneficial ownership, where an individual or an entity will have ownership either directly or indirectly, not beyond 10%. Significant beneficial ownership, right? So limit the significant beneficial ownership to less than 10%. And second, one more option that it has recommended is you have announced a public sector enterprise policy. Back in the year 2021, you have announced the public sector enterprises policy. Under this policy, you have identified certain sectors, you have called them as, or you have defined them as strategic, where there is a national strategy or national security angle, where there is a growth angle, which are required for the control by the government, etc. And you have also identified certain sectors as non-strategic. Non-strategic. For example, non-strategic, textile, consumer goods, transportation, hospitality, etc. So you have divided the whole industries into strategic as well as non-strategic. Do not allow Chinese companies to invest in strategic. But these are non-strategic, right? These are not so important in terms of national security, promotion of growth for you, for the central government, etc. So why not allow up to 49% investment from China, and that too under the strict governance or under the strict approval route through a committee which will be headed by cabinet secretary, which will be headed by the cabinet secretary. Done. So these are the recommendations which have been provided by the Rajiv Gauba panel in order to address this particular issue of Chinese investments in Indian market. Very important, please make a note of this. Next article, Bima Vistaar. Bottlenecks have delayed rollout of Bima Vistaar. What is this? The Insurance Regulatory Development Authority of India has announced a trinity called as Bima Trinity. Bima Trinity. Under Bima Trinity, there are three components. One is Bima Sugam. Second one is Bima Vistaar. And the third one is Bima Vahak. Bima, basically it's a Hindi term. Bima means insurance. Bima Vahak. Right? What is the importance of all the three pillars or the trinity here? Bima Sugam essentially is a platform, a one-stop platform for all the requirements that an individual has associated with insurance. Whatever kind of insurance you want to purchase, You want to compare insurance services or insurance products. You want to claim insurance. You want to file a complaint against the companies, etc. All of that will be made available, easily accessible to you under Bima Sugam. In fact, please understand, Bima Sugam already has been launched very recently. And this Bima Sugam has become the first DPI platform. Remember this. It has become the first DPI platform, that is a digital public infrastructure platform. It has become the first digital public infrastructure platform. What about Bima Vistaar? Bima Vistaar essentially refers to a single insurance product. Right now, you are purchasing different types of insurances for different types of coverage, right? Vehicle, personal, accidental, health, right, etc. So instead of having different kinds of insurance products, why not package everything into one insurance product and sell it to the, right, let's say, the beneficiary or the consumer or the person who wants to purchase it. That is Bima Vistar. And there is a concern associated with this. That is, there is a delay in terms of rolling out this particular insurance product. In fact, earlier reports suggested that there is a discussion that there will be a product priced 1,500 rupees which will be rolled out as Bima Vistar. But because of the pricing issue, because of the technology issue, etc., there is a delay. Apparently, there is a delay now in terms of rolling out Bima Vistar. And the third pillar, that is Bima Vahak, essentially is a type of a distribution channel to ensure the insurance penetration will happen at the lowest level, that is at the individual household level, even in the rural part of India. So these are certain points associated with the article. Now, let's go to the next and the last article for today's session or today's discussion: dark patterns. Dark patterns stay for consumers, gig staff, post self audit. What is the discussion here? First and foremost, dark patterns are essentially referring to the practices of the sellers. Dark patterns refer to the practices of the companies where they will try to basically persuade, they'll try to persuade the consumers or the customers, etc., through certain practices to buy something. Right? This is an unethical practice in a nutshell. The Central Consumer Protection Authority, CCPA, Central Consumer Protection Authority, has identified 13 practices which has been classified as dark patterns, and it asked all these particular e-commerce companies to submit a report, audit their system and submit a report stating that there are no such dark patterns which are used by the companies. In fact, 26 companies have submitted a self-audit report. A large entity or largest e-commerce, let's say seller in India, Amazon, is yet to submit this particular report. But the concern is very simple here. On one side, these entities claim that they have removed all the dark patterns. Dark patterns are not there in the platform, etc. But different audits or different surveys show that even today, different types of dark patterns are followed by the e-commerce companies. For example, in the context of the gig service provider, or let's say gig economy, many of these employees face are basically bearing the burden of dark patterns here. For example, some of the dark patterns that have been mentioned are: one, false urgency. Right? What is the basic idea for false urgency? Let's say I'm working as a Swiggy delivery partner. Now, in my mobile, suddenly there will be an order which will pop up. I will have to either accept it or reject it. But what if along with the message to accept the order, there is also a timer? There is a timer which says 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 8 seconds. It is moving very fast. And along with that, there's a message saying that if you do not accept it within 9 seconds, the order will not be available to you. You may not be able to complete the number of orders that you want to complete and earn wages today. It will basically create an urgency. It will create a panic and it might force me to accept the order. That is false urgency. Second one which has been mentioned is wage concealment. Wage concealment. What is the problem with wage concealment here? Let's say again, same continuation of the same example. I'm a Swiggy delivery partner. I'll accept the order. But after accepting the order, I repeat, after accepting the order, they will tell me how much money I'm going to make by making this delivery. And if I do not want to deliver now, after accepting, I want to cancel, how much will be the penalty that I'll be forced to pay? So before accepting the order, nothing is provided. After accepting, all of this information will be provided to me. Right? So this is basically a practice where this information should have been provided to the delivery partner before they accept the order, not after accepting the order. There is also a type of a unfair practice, that is unfair deactivations. Unfair deactivations, that is basically in the context of the Swiggy delivery partners, Ola, right? Let's say the partners, etc. Suddenly their app will be locked. These people will not be allowed to accept any orders, right? Will not be allowed to check anything in the app, etc. The app will be locked. The reason behind locking the app or deactivating their account, when they will be again be allowed to accept the orders, etc., all of this information will not be provided to these right participants. So these are some of the, right, let's say, the dark patterns which various surveys, various studies have shown that are still practiced by these particular e-commerce or gig economic companies. Right? So the government has to take more measures, has to become much more proactive and ensure that these entities will not be practicing these kind of dark patterns, which are unethical practices. So these are certain very important articles as well as the concepts associated with these articles that I wanted to discuss with you people in today's session. If you have liked this particular session, do not forget to hit the like button. If you are yet to join our YouTube channel, kindly do it right now. That's it from my side. See you next week again with set of articles. Till then, take care.